Hello and welcome to the old Fliers. Paul Williams told how in 1964 the Zambian Air Force was created. They recruited expat members of the Rhodesian and South African Air Forces, the Royal Air Force, and newly recruited trainee Zambians. As an RAF serviceman, Paul had been offered transfer to Zambia where better weather in an exotic location appealed to him. He became witness to the remarkable story of change as African countries shed colonial administration to gain their independence. This was the case for the Republic of Zambia, which was previously Northern Rhodesia. Since 1953, Northern Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia and Nyasaland had been known as the Central African Federation. The federation was dissolved in December 1963, and a year later Zambia gained its independence from Britain. Meanwhile, Southern Rhodesia, free from the federation, remained a de jure British colony. Time to introduce you to Ian Douglas Smith. Smith was born to British immigrants in Selukwe, a small town in the southern Rhodesian Midlands, 4 years before the colony became self-governing in 1923. During the Second World War, Smith opted out of Rhodes University in South Africa to enlist to fight for the British Empire. After a year's training at Guilo under the Empire Air Training Scheme and joined by a majority of both Australian and British men, Smith passed out with the rank of pilot officer in September 1942 as an RAF officer. He hoped to be stationed in Britain, but was posted to the Middle East. There he had the experience of flying 1,500 feet below sea level when crossing the Dead Sea. Next posting was to number 237 Rhodesia Squadron RAF, flying Hurricanes. Near Alexandria, taking off in the dark with sea mist obscuring the runway, the undercarriage of his aircraft struck a bomb shelter, resulting in a bashed face and many broken bones. 5 months in hospital at Cairo saw him fit for service in March 1944. He was offered a return as instructor in Rhodesia, but rejoined his squadron flying Spitfire Mark 9s in Corsica. There they escorted American Mitchells, Bostons and Marauder bombers, or carrying out strafing raids in Italy. Whilst leading a strafing raid into the Po Valley, they came across a railway yard which they shot up. Smith made the mistake of making a second pass and his aircraft was hit. He parachuted into the mountains where a peasant family in the Vallascura Valley hid him for a brief time. He joined a group of pro-Allied Italian partisans with whom he took part in sabotage operations against the German garrison. When the Germans pulled out of the area in October 1944, Smith left to try to link up with the Allied forces who had just invaded southern France. Accompanied by 3 others and a local guide, Smith hiked across the Maritime Alps towards the American troops. At the summit, he removed his boots to dry his socks. His boots froze and he couldn't put them back on, finishing the journey walking barefoot over ice and snow. Their summer clothing didn't help in those freezing conditions either. American troops recovered him in November 1944. Smith turned down the offer to return to Rhodesia, instead returning to active service in April 1945 with number 130 Punjab Squadron, by then based at Western Germany. This squadron had been adopted by the Maharaja of Punjab, who funded the purchase of Spitfires as well as giving funds for the mess. The wing was under the command of Ace Group Captain Johnny Johnson. Smith flew combat missions there, saying, "I was having a little bit of fun shooting up odd things." Until the war in Europe ended on the 7th of May 1945 with Germany's surrender, Smith remained with number 130 Squadron for the rest of his service, flying with the unit in Denmark and Norway, and was discharged at the end of 45 with the rank of flight lieutenant. On discharge, he returned home to complete his university degree in economics. In August 1948, he married, bought a farm in his hometown and became Member of Parliament for Selukwe at 29 years of age, the country's youngest ever MP. Originally a Liberal, he defected to the United Federal Party in 1953 and served as Chief Whip from 1958. In 1960, the UK Prime Minister Harold Macmillan gave a speech evoking winds of change blowing through Africa.
It is natural and right that you should pause, to take stock of your position, to look back at what you have achieved, to look forward to what lies ahead.
Smith left the UFP in 1961 in protest over the territory's new constitution, and in the following year helped Winston Field to form the all-white, firmly conservative Rhodesian Front, which called for independence with a gradual shift to majority rule that meant black rule. The reality was that 6 million blacks outnumbered the 260,000 whites. Smith became Deputy Prime Minister following the Rhodesian Front's December 1962 election victory and stepped up into the premiership after Field resigned in April 1964. With the UK governments refusing to grant independence, whilst Rhodesia did not devise a set timetable for the introduction of majority rule, talks with the UK Prime Minister Harold Wilson repeatedly broke down, leading Smith and his cabinet to declare independence on the 11th of November 1965. His government endured in the face of the United Nations economic sanctions with the assistance of South Africa and Portugal. Talks with the UK in 1966, 1968 and 1971 came to nothing. Smith declared Rhodesia a republic in 1970 and led the Rhodesian Front to 3 more decisive election victories over the next 7 years. Rhodesia was the second last country in Africa to be governed by whites. After the Bush Wars began in earnest in 1972, Smith negotiated with the non-militant nationalist leader Bishop Abel Mugabe and the rival guerrilla governments headed by Joshua Nkomo and Robert Mugabe. In 1978, Smith and non-militant nationalists, including Mugabe, signed the internal settlement under which the country became Zimbabwe Rhodesia in 1979. Mugabe and Nkomo continued fighting. No country recognised the settlement. Smith was part of Mugabe's delegation that settled with the UK and the revolutionary guerrillas at Lancaster House. Following this agreement in December 1979, Southern Rhodesia achieved internationally recognised independence as Zimbabwe in April 1980 with Robert Mugabe as the first Prime Minister. Smith became leader of the opposition during Mugabe's first 7 years in power following Zimbabwe's recognised independence in 1980. Smith was a stridently vocal critic of the Mugabe government both before and after his retirement from frontline politics in 1987. In 1993 to 2003, Mugabe began the process of expropriating land for resettlement.
There are certainly white farmers who do not farm their land properly. There are farmers who've abandoned their land through no fault of their own, and there are expatriates owning land who do not use them. Now, there will be a turnover which will become available to African farmers, but in the interests of the entire country, I feel that all farming land should be properly used, and if necessary, the government should expropriate to that effect. In other words, if somebody is not using their land to its fullest extent, then they would be entitled to go ahead and expropriate, obviously paying the price, whatever it's valued at.
Compensation was offered if you were lucky. Where there was once profitable farming exports, now there were imports. Rampant inflation, credit from international lenders drying up, and personal tax set at 55% was a disaster denied by Mugabe and his cronies. The food bowl of Africa became the begging bowl. Smith's farm, known as Gwenauru, was expropriated in stages between 2002 and 2012. His wife didn't get to see this as she died in 1994. Smith dedicated much of his 1997 memoirs, Bitter Harvest, to condemning Mugabe and several UK politicians. Mugabe's reputation plummeted as Smith and his legacy improved. Zimbabwean opposition supporters lauded the elderly Smith as a symbol of resistance. Ian Smith remained in Zimbabwe until 2005, when he moved to Cape Town in South Africa for medical reasons. He died 2 years later at the age of 88. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to encourage new content.